Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a great evening. Welcome back to Just My Stupid Opinion.
You profit from fear and hate, hoarding wealth and amassing power. The walls have been unleashed. We will not submit or cower. It's humanity's darkest side. We are ruled by thieves and liars.
Alrighty, so it's been a couple weeks since the last time I put out an episode, although I've been streaming a little bit lately. Actually, the last stream I did went on longer than I expected to. I was just supposed to have an hour or two conversation with Arjun and then turned into a whole frickin' panel that lasted nearly 4 hours. That was, spent my whole morning doing that. That was unintentional. But that was a good stream, and we were talking about what was going on in the Indian elections because there was a lot of shit going down there. Ended up being a lot of people killed during just over the polling that was going on over there, and there was some corruption that was going on. It was a good stream, and apparently there's been more that's been going on ever since then. So we're probably going to end up talking about that soon enough. But let's start off today by talking about the royal wedding. I don't care. Moving on. Actually, the one thing I will say about the royal wedding is it seems like a majority of people don't give a shit because even a poll came out from UK citizens, and the majority of them could not care less what was going on with that friggin' wedding. Actually, the only person that I actually could find that cared was my mom. She was asking me if I was going to be watching that royal wedding. I was like, you think I'm getting up at 7 in the morning to watch some random people I don't know who think they're better than everyone else get married? Fuck off. I don't have time for that sort of shit. But there's been a few different stories in the news lately, and some of them have been some big stories. That was actually, I would say, one of the problems I had last week, too, is there was not too much going on, or just a lot of the stuff I would be repeating myself on, so I wasn't too interested in doing that. Plus, it was a busy week last week, so not really much of a point to, much of time to put out an episode. All right, but the first one I want to get into, which has received a little bit of attention, but in my opinion, it's been completely overshadowed by everything else. This is also my other problem with the royal wedding, is that there has been news that's going on, important news, but what is everybody talking about? Meghan Markle and what the hell she's going to be wearing and who's going to be at the wedding. But meanwhile, nobody is focusing on some of these bigger issues, such as this one. Just yesterday, this article came out that talked about how all of the Chilean bishops have resigned to the Pope Francis over sex abuse cover-up. Jesus, this is just a story that is never ending inside the fucking Vatican. It has to do with goddamn pedophilia. And this has been going on for decades, hundreds of years even. I wouldn't be surprised, although, our investigation can't really go back that far. But what I find most funny about this is, sorry, let me use a better term of phrase. It's not funny. It's not funny when little kids are being abused by people like this. But what I think is needs to be pointed out is that Pope Francis is supposed to be one of the most progressive popes that have been around. He's supposed to be the one that is supposed to bring a new. He's supposed to bring change to the Vatican. Funny how all these people that tell us, oh, we're going to bring you change, don't really seem to bring much change. Just seems to be more of the same. It's all an act just to get in office, It doesn't really matter to these people whatsoever. But it has everything to do with the fact that, once again, there are cardinals, bishops, and priests fucking little boys, and nobody cares. In fact, this has actually been a systemic problem inside the Catholic Church, which has to do with is how they are actually actively trying to cover up these sort of scandals. There's been more than multiple times where we have had large cases that have gone on, and what has the Vatican done? Have they offered up this bishop, this cardinal, this priest to the local authorities so that way they can be charged and make a good example of them? No. Most of the time, they end up recalling them to the Vatican. They end up recalling them to put them under the protection of the Pope and the protection of the Vatican City and the Vatican guards that are there, because the Vatican is a city-state in and of itself. They have their own rules, their own laws. It is a country in and of itself. So if they recall these priests, these Vaticans, these priests, these bishops, these cardinals to the Vatican, well, then local authorities can't touch them. And very, very, very rarely do they actually ship them out to face their day in court in wherever they committed their atrocities. And these are serial rapists. These are people that have done it to a dozen, 2 dozen. So we even hear sometimes as much as more than 100 little kids have been touched, raped, molested by these fucking animals. And this is actually, it's times like this when I'm so happy I'm not religious. I am so happy about it, because the one problem I've always had when we're discussing religion has to do with the morality thing. And I've even said in the past that, something like an objective morality that comes out of religion, it's good at keeping people on the same page. It's good at keeping people, knowing what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. However, the problem is that I've seen time and time again is that when these people at the top, these people that have dedicated their lives to God, that have dedicated their lives to being a leader of their community, dedicated their lives to supposedly being the most moral people in the world, we always see how it actually ends up the opposite. These turn out to be some of the slimiest fucking scumballs that ever fucking exist. And Pope Francis is no different. I mean, this is a guy that has made his career on bashing Donald Trump, on trying to tell people to be more tolerant and more progressive to what's affecting other people. He's shat on his own religion, which, I can't imagine what a lot of Christians think when their own vicar, the guy at the top who's supposed to be that link between God and man, is actually shitting on his own religion. And he's even gone into he's even gone in and more or less showed subservience to mosques and in Islamic culture, Like, how could anyone ever respect this guy as their leader? My grandfather is a Catholic. He has no love for Pope Francis. He does not like Pope Francis, hates Pope Francis. I've heard him on a couple times. It's not like he goes out and says it too much, but the few times that I've caught him bringing up the Pope, he never has nice things to say about the man. So this has always been my problem when we're talking about the religious aspect, is that a lot of the people who put themselves in these positions end up being actually just pieces of shit. And this has also goes sort of against my philosophy when dealing with people, is the more that somebody says they're for something or against something, chances are that they're actually they're doing it as a cover, because they're completely the opposite way. And actually a good example of this would be male feminists. They try and present themselves as being better than the rest, more tolerant than the rest. We're aware of the problems that women face, and we're here to help fight for women. Why don't you throw me a free fuck every now and then? Come on, man. Like, come on, chick, why aren't you giving me a free fuck? I'm better than the rest of these people. And a lot of times they turn into scumbags doing sexually harassing and assaulting women, all under the guise of being progressive, all under the guise of being male feminist, while they sit there and trash on every other guy who shows a little bit of masculinity. So this is just one example of the type of person I'm talking about, and how they actually, despite the fact they front themselves as one way, they're completely the opposite. But this is actually something I like to see. I have a lot of respect for these Chilean bishops who decided to say, we've had enough. We've had enough with this scandal going on. Like, to me, these are true Christians. These Chilean bishops are true Christians who are sticking up for their morals, that are sticking up for their standards, because they've said, we're done. We're done with you in the Vatican. We can't do this anymore. You're not doing anything about it. So it doesn't seem to matter whether it was Pope Francis or Pope Benedict or Pope whoever the fuck it is this time. They all are the same. They're all cut from the same cloth. Funny. Men of the cloth, all cut from the same cloth. I didn't even mean that as a joke, but I guess it kind of turned out that way. Yep. It's times like this, like, I am so happy that I am not a Christian. I am not a religious person. And if you are religious, and I'm sure there's a number of my audience who are, I mean, to each their own, if that's your choice. But I just don't want to see anybody who's actually trying to defend the Vatican from this sort of thing. And I don't think most people will. I think actually the standard Christian that I meet has better morals, has a better sense of what is right and wrong than these people at the top. These people at the head of the church, who's supposed to be the top of the pyramid. They just time and time again have gone against their morals. And this doesn't just include Christianity, it's pretty much every single religion too. The imams in Islamic culture are exactly the same way. They present themselves as being one way, but more often than not, they're not. They'll turn against their own religious text whenever it is convenient for them. And one thing that is almost undeniable is that almost every single religion has a pedophilia problem. What is it with religious people, and I don't mean the average religious people, but people at the top, the hierarchy of the religious people, liking little kids? And again, I can't even say that this is strictly a religion problem, although I've seen it manifest itself in religion time and time again. But this seems to be a problem all over. I mean, how many times have we heard about a politician that has run a sex ring or has run a pedophile ring or this, that, or the other? You know, it's not restricted to religion, but it seems to be all forms of power. Anybody that's in a power hierarchy seems to have some sort of problem with, if it's not pedophilia, they have some sort of problem with sexual harassment, rape. So, but thing is, not being a religious person, we don't really have being more an atheist, we don't have a hierarchy, so that's not really the same problem. Although one day I'm really going to get into my problem with the atheist community for you guys, because I have big problems with them too. But I'm really glad to see that some of these men of the cloth are finally starting to take a stand against this corrupt Vatican, this corrupt hierarchy. It needs to be torn down, burned to the ground, and restarted all over again. But anyway, that was just my little rant about these perverted people at the top. And the other story that let's get into our second story of the day, which is much worse. No, I can't say it's much worse, but it is just as bad at the very least. But it doesn't involve pedophilia. So I came across this article the other day from Centre for Investigative Research Canada, and it's pretty much going to say what most people on the right already know, what most people who have done a little bit of research into the religion of Islam is going to already know. And that is, and actually before we do completely get into this, I just want to go on a little more rant, is I actually think that pedophilia is worse in Islam. It is way fucking worse. It is much more normalized. It is much more accepted amongst the common people. Because the thing is that's the difference between a Christian and what I find with the Muslims, or is the fact that your average Christian does not approve of pedophilia. They think it's just as gross as anybody else does. That can't necessarily be said for Islam. You know, there's been plenty of times we've heard about relationships that these grown men have with little boys, and to them it's completely acceptable. Actually, one of the most disgusting stories I ever heard come out of the Afghan war was the fact that one soldier was walking around one of the bases, a Canadian soldier, and he started to hear a scream. So he ran to where he heard the scream, and he busted through a door. And what did he find? He found two Muslim men sodomizing a young boy. I think he was about 11 years old or something like that at the time. But the thing is these were one of our allies. This was one of the people in Afghanistan that was supposed to be fighting with the Canadians, with the Americans. They were our ally. But the soldier couldn't do anything. They were informed that they weren't really allowed to get involved with the daily life of people over there. You know, even though we're there fighting a war, we can't really prevent them from doing their thing. He said what he wanted to do was pull out his sidearm and just put one round in each of these guys' heads, you know, stop them from doing what they're doing. But in reality, what could he do? The only thing he could do was close the door and walk away from the screaming. It was the most disgusting thing I had heard in my life. I couldn't fucking believe that. I don't even know what I would do if I was put in that situation. I mean, having to walk away from a young boy who is being sodomized like that, it's disgusting. But anyway, putting that aside, this story that is coming up is about Islam, and something that everybody already knows on the right, or most people on the right know, and anybody that has done a little bit of research into Islam. And it's a Canadian imam says Islamic law to be implemented when Muslims are the majority. So as we see here, it says This is actually the text from what this is the quote. It says, here we go. The following are excerpts from the Bilal Phillips sermon published on YouTube on August 21st, 2016. He says, Sharia law is the law of God, the law of Allah, which is good for all time, all people, in all places. That is the reality. Wherever Muslims are able to apply it, it is their duty to apply it, not to force it upon people as a minority in a country of non-Muslims. We have foolish Muslims, calling for Sharia in the middle of Europe and creating the scare. We can't apply it unless we are the majority, and the majority agree. Then we can apply it. If for the majority don't agree, even we're all Muslims, but the majority don't agree to apply Sharia law to try. To apply it is to unleash bloodshed in the Muslim nation because Muslims will fight you. Holy shit. I can't believe that we've even got to go over this and explain this to people, because this has been seen time and time again. And for me, I've had a few different red pills on Islam, but I've just been watching the events that have gone over the last 3 years in Europe, and this is exactly what's been going on. And they've been like he even said, this imam, they've been pretty vocal and open about the whole situation. But this is what also Islam does. Is the whole point of Islam is spreading it worldwide. It's spreading it so that way eventually they take control. See, I think it was the leader of ISIS. I can never remember the guy's name. They have a lot of Arabic names are so difficult to pronounce that I can never really remember them. But anyway, the leader of ISIS one time said that America has all the clocks, but we have all the time in the world. And the whole point of that is to slowly spread the religion into other nations. This is actually the danger of importing so many Muslim people. Now, I don't want to try and make this too much of a generalization for the Muslim people, because I know there are some Muslims out there that don't really agree with this sort of thing, and there are plenty of Muslims that got away from their local country and came over to the West because they wanted to get away from that shit. But this doesn't seem to be the majority, unfortunately. While there are many who would speak out against Islam and Sharia law, we have someone like Imam Tahiri, who is known as the Imam of Peace. And he has many, many times spoken out about radical Islam, and he has big problems with it. And because of it, he's been marked for death by a lot of Islamic groups. But unfortunately, this is exactly what it talks about in the text of it. It talks about in the text, some of the holy books that the Muslims follow. We're talking about the Hadith, for instance, and it talks about. And it talks about how the whole point is to go forward for the Muslims and spread their religion across. And whether that is spread through soft Islamization, which would be sort of going in, trying to change the culture and the values, maybe change the laws a little bit in order to make it more acceptable, or it gets implemented by hard Islamization. And that one is a much more brutal, much more bloody sort of takeover, in which they come in. They commit acts of violence and many times wage sort of an internal war against the country. And right now, my biggest fear about this whole situation is because he's talking about Canada right here. And Canada is actually, I would say, I hate to say this, but we are ripe for the taking for the Islamic culture right now, for the Islamic religion, because we have a leader right now who is not only welcoming him in by the boatloads, by the thousands every single year. I mean, for instance, there's a number of Christians that were part of the Syrian refugees, but we barely took in any Christian Syrian refugees. We left most of them over there, even though they were the ones that were most likely to be killed, along with the Syrians atheists, although I don't know how big the atheist community is inside of Syria. But we left these people there, and we took on a bunch of Muslims who were actually much safer over there than the Christians. And because of this, we've already implemented some forms of Sharia law. I mean, it's already acceptable in Canada to have it's already acceptable for a civil court case to be dealt under Sharia law. So we're talking something like a divorce is something that could be held under Sharia law. And they give you bullshit reasons as to why. For instance, they say, like, well, you let us deal with it ourselves in our own communities. You already got a clogged justice system. You don't have time to be dealing with these menial little things. Let us handle it. But how could you possibly allow a community to before I say my next part is that the other thing is too is they say it requires the consent of both parties, the man and the woman. But how could you possibly allow for a two-party consent system when the testimony of a woman is worth that of half, maybe a quarter of a man, depending on where we're talking about where they come from? And again, when you have a culture that has the man who dictates everything that goes on in his family for his kids, his wife, and they have to obey him, well then of course they're going to go through the process, even if the woman doesn't want to, because she doesn't have a fucking choice. And the problem is too, we're going to see, I think Canadians might be actually waking up to this now. I think we might actually be starting to see a turn. I mean, there's not much we can do while Justin Trudeau is in office, although I would like to see the Conservatives try and whip up some Liberals to try and maybe bring around a vote of no confidence. But the problem is while Justin Trudeau holds a majority government, and he rules that majority government with an iron fist, then the Prime Minister and the current government has to hold the confidence of the House, and it doesn't look like the Liberals are going to turn on them anytime soon. They're going to hold that confidence of the House. So we need to find some other way to prevent this. But I actually think that Canadians might be waking up to this because people were starting to see the problems that are going on in Europe. We're starting to see the problems in our own culture right now. We're seeing the friction between these new arrivals who are trying to implement things their way and the standard Canadian culture. And this makes me think that this is one advantage that on the right has is we need to play this idea of patriotism and nationalism and Canadian values, because this is something that'll completely expose these ideas for what they really are: barbaric. They are absolutely barbaric, these sort of ideas that come out of Islam. I mean, the idea that you can toss gay people off roofs simply because they're gay. And let's not pretend like this is just ISIS doing that. Well, ISIS really was the one that was most prominently known these days for doing it. This happens all over the Islamic world, so let's not pretend like it is strictly them who does it. And there's a number of gay individuals in these communities that are completely underground. However, funny enough, it appears that there actually is, despite all their talk about being anti-gay, the Muslim community in the Muslim world, in the Islamic world, has a lot of gay activity. So it's actually kind of ironic. But the other thing is too is we have a clash of values here, because there are things that are accepted by the religion that is not accepted over here. We don't accept multiple polygamy. We don't accept polygamy over here. We're a monogamous culture. One couple allowed to be together. We don't allow multiple ones, and for a few different reasons. But many of these people, they end up bringing over multiple wives and they live with them. But actually, another big one has to do with incest. Incest is rampant in the Islamic community. I mean, if you just look at what is going on for the birth rates in Britain right now, in the UK, Muslims are more likely to have more stillborns, they're more likely to have more complications during birth, and they're more likely to have more complications after birth defects. And there was a report that came out a couple of years ago which said that there was something about 70% of people from Pakistan are inbred right now. And the problem is because they're marrying first cousins. They are marrying their family in together. They end up breeding together and produce kids that have a bunch of birth defects. And because of it, it also produces more low IQ individuals. But this imam is right. See, he's talking about implementing it slowly and quietly off the start until they are the majority, because in Europe right now there is that friction, is that there's a lot of there's a lot of groups that have sprung up in response to the large immigration crisis that has happened. And they're trying to fight back against these clash of cultures, these clash of values. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard of European women that have been assaulted or raped by these groups, and it's become completely insane. I mean, there's complete areas in UK right now that are just rape central. Sweden for a long time was held up as a great society. Now it's fucking rape capital of the world. Like, that only happened once there was the large migrant influx. Germany, France, these are all areas that are now suddenly having problems with large amounts of rape of their women. And one reason I actually think that this may not affect America as much is because of their gun laws, is their right to bear arms, is the fact that the women can actually bear arms. So I think this could help prevent these sort of situations happening in America. I mean, guns are the perfect equalizers for women if they're ever facing a physical disadvantage. You know, if they're weaker than their opponents, then they don't have to worry if they're carrying a gun. So I don't think this will be a big issue for America too much, but this is the clash of cultures that everybody has warned about. This is what happens when you import a lot of people from another society that don't share the same values as you, and worse than that, they have no respect for your culture. And the problem in some areas, such as like Sweden, is the fact that the problem with people such as like in Sweden is the fact that the whole politically correct culture has taken over so much that these people are even afraid to admit that something is wrong. They're afraid to admit that these people might be different. I mean, when Tim Pool went to Sweden a couple years ago and was broadcasting about that, he was getting a tour by a local there who was driving through communities in Sweden that was just everywhere you looked. It was women in veils. It was Arabic stores, Arabic writing. And there's also plenty of other reasons to be concerned about these sort of situations. Because let's say in France, right now in France, one of the problems that they have is has to do with the integration, because and the integration and takeover of industries. They already have the problem. We've already kind of gone over the problem of integration. But when we're talking about these industries, there was a documentary that came out that was talking about the halal industry in France. And right now what was happening is that the halal industry was keeping money inside the Muslim communities because these people were self-segregating and keeping them in with their own kind. Everybody was going all the Muslims were going spending their money in these halal restaurants. But these halal butcher shops, these meat shops, but the halal industry had taken over so much that about 90% of the chicken that was coming out of France, that is available for the people of France, came from a halal butcher shop. So regular French citizens would have to go into these halal shops, spend the money, and then that money was just being redistributed inside the Islamic community that was there. So it was literally keeping the money inside the community. These are the problems that have happened from these mass migrations. I mean, fuck. It's terrible to say, but it seems like Europe's going to be done. Either that or the entire continent is going to face some large uprising. They're going to face some sort of like continent civil war. They're just going to eventually, people are going to have enough and they're going to rise up in revolt. And then we're literally going to have a war of cultures. Not a clash of cultures, a war of cultures. All right. And I guess actually this can bring me into even the next part that I wanted to talk about, which has to do with despite everything we're talking about, despite all the problems that we're having, despite Andrea Horwath, who is the Ontario leader of the New Democratic Party, the NDP party, she recently said something that I don't believe is sitting well with many people, and I don't even know how well this is sitting with her own base on the left, although considering how the NDP is currently sitting second over the Wins Liberals in the polling right now, maybe it is going over better for them. And this has to do with the NDP wants a sanctuary province. That's what they want out of Ontario. It's funny, actually, because not too long ago, last week, Andrea Horwath was on Twitter with the hashtag AskAndrea, in which people could tweet to her and they could ask her questions about her platform, what she wanted to do, whatever it happened to be. It was just a way to reach out to the people more. It's actually, in my opinion, it was a good idea what she did. Like, it was a very good idea to take to social media to try and spread her message more, just politically speaking. But I tweeted to her a couple times, and I don't know, she didn't respond to me. I almost feel like it was intentional, because one thing that I asked her is, I said, why do you want Ontario to be a sanctuary province? Why didn't you consult the people of Ontario about this decision? And what if we don't want to live in a sanctuary province? I mean, this is our country, this is our homes, and she's making this decision for everyone, the millions of people living inside Ontario. And we just have to look to our neighbors to the south to realize how bad the idea of a sanctuary city is happening. The idea of a sanctuary province or a sanctuary city, it really is. Because, for instance, California, let's say California, that's perfect. There's plenty of areas that are considered sanctuary cities in there, such as San Diego. Well, these areas that consider themselves sanctuary cities are now seeing a mass exodus. And some places like San Diego were a heavy left-wing city. You know, California is just a left-wing state in and of itself. They always voted Democrat. It's always been a blue state, at least in these areas along the West Coast. Now, if we're getting more into the more rural areas and a little more eastwards of California, then those have actually many times before have been more Republican. But the main cities and all those areas right along the waterline, such as Los Angeles, San Diego, these all areas have always been typically very blue, very Democratic, because our colors are reversed in Canada and America. Democrats are blue and Republicans are red. But we're now seeing a mass exodus from there because people realize that their strategy is not working. They realize that there have been major problems there, such as major debt that is going on. There have been crimes have actually skyrocketed because they have all these people coming in. And a good example is the MS-13 gang, which is pretty much just gladly walking across the border and taking their place up in America in order to sell their drugs, spread their influence. And this is why, despite the corporate media is telling you different, why Trump called them animals, because that's exactly what the MS-13 gang are. They are animals. And that's the misconception that everybody is playing on right now, that Trump was talking about immigrants in general. All immigrants are animals. That's what the Democratic Party is running with. That is what the corporate media is running with. And that's what many people on the left wing of politics in America are running with right now. But when we look at it in context, he was always talking about the MS-13 gang, who have constantly been one of the most violent gangs out there, that have constantly caused so much of the rapes, so much of the murders, so much of the drugs coming into America. Like, they are the worst of the worst. But these are the problems that they're having. And then what ends up happening with these areas? They move from these areas to typically Republican, more conservative areas. And then they start changing the demographics there, because they say, fuck this, fuck San Diego, I'm getting out of here. And they're having people leave, like the citizens leave, by the truckload. So they leave, they go to certain areas such as Florida or Arizona, places that are typically more Republican, more right-wing. Do they change their politics even though they've seen the disastrous side effects in their own cities? No, they stay on the left. And then what do? They change the demographics in there. They go in, they continue voting Democrat, and it's just been a shit show. I mean, look at so many of the Democratic cities that are out there. They're terrible. Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia. Like, holy shit, these are so many bad areas that just... But they don't do anything differently. So eventually, we're actually seeing the Republican states start to get watered down slowly and slowly and slowly, till eventually it's going to completely change. And actually, another reason is because of the immigration coming southwards, coming up from Mexico and South America, is because these people also typically tend to vote for Democrats in America, that they're seeing their demographics being watered down. This is exactly what we're starting to see in our province right now. We're starting to see it in our country, because these people that are these asylum seekers coming across the border are coming in. They're immediately being taken care of, and many times giving, if not citizenships, they're being given permanent residency status, which gives them access to health care, gives them access to schools, and many of the other things that we as taxpayers pay for. We're supporting these people because of it. And just going back real quick to this article, as we see here, it says when they're talking about this idea of a sanctuary province, says it would simply allow people to access health, police, and social services without disclosing their immigration status. So people that pay no taxes could get healthcare, welfare, send their kids to school. Soon it will mean getting driver's license and any other services that require the rest of us to be citizens or permanent residents. But she didn't seem to, going back to when she was active on Twitter doing the hashtag Ask Andrea, she didn't answer my question. I had a few different people that liked my tweet, that retweeted my tweet, but she didn't bother to answer it whatsoever. And I would have loved to see an answer to this, because why is it that we as citizens have to be treated as second-class citizens to these people? Why? Why are we treated as second-class citizens? Because I don't know about the rest of you watching this, but I personally am starting to feel like a second-class citizen in my own country, in my own province, in my own home. I'm being told how terrible I am, because, like, how terrible my country is, constantly being told about, like, how racist, sexist, misogynistic, and every other ism that there is in the frickin' English vocabulary. This is what they're saying about their citizens. And meanwhile, they just say, come on in, everybody else, come on into this culture that is so terrible. So they have no problem treating us as second-class citizens. But why does the NDP and the Liberal Party have no problem treating Canadians as second-class citizens? Just give me 1 minute and I'll answer that question. The reason they have no problem with treating us as second-class citizens is because the Liberals and the New Democrats, the New Democratic Party, are not ignorant to who their base is. They are actually more aware than you or I of who is voting for them. And it is not Canadian citizens. It is not the average person going out there. It is not the working class that is voting for him. It is not the lower class voting for him. The ones who do vote for him tend to be more in the upper middle class. And one reason for this is because I think is these people like to they like to pretend that these people in the about upper middle class, they like to pretend like they've had a hard life, especially if we're talking about not the actual parents themselves, but the children. They don't like to see, when they're sitting there bitching about all the problems of society, they don't want to see themselves as part of the problems. These are what we would call champagne socialists, or I guess we also champagne liberals is a term I've used a couple times, which is they live luxurious lifestyles, or pretty nice lifestyles, but they don't want to see themselves as part of the problem. They want to see themselves being part of the downtrodden, as part of the ones that have had a hard life and who are being screwed over by the society. So this is why they tend to vote for them. But everybody else happens to be usually immigrants. That is actually one of their biggest supporters, people who have come from other countries, who have made their citizenship. Few different reasons. I think because it lines in their politics in their own country many times, but also it's because they vote for them to get continuing government benefits. So that way that the conservatives get in, well, shit, they may cut off our social assistance. We don't want that. We're going to vote for the Liberals or New Democrats. So that's actually something that they are doing right now. The Liberals and New Democrats are constantly fighting for the same voter base. And that might be an advantage that is seen to the right-wing politics, is the fact that there is more unity over there. But I think there is starting to be a split more and more, mostly due to Justin Trudeau and the way he's conducting things. This is giving rise to people who are done with just being, even nice conservatives, will put them that way. People are done and they want to see a Canada that is actually built for them, their own country that treats them primarily, because this is what our country's supposed to do. This is what our government is supposed to do. It's supposed to be for the citizens, but the New Democrats and the Liberals care more about those coming across the border illegally than they seem to do about the average person out there, the average Canadian out there. And this is what has given rise to to parties such as the Nationalist Party, which is coming in with a little more far right than the Conservative Party's platform, because they're saying we're done with it. And I don't know how popular these parties are right now, But I actually think they will gain a lot of steam very quickly as more Canadians become more disillusioned with their government, become more pissed off with Justin Trudeau, the Liberal Party, the New Democrats, because people like Jagmeet Singh, he's no different. He's no different than Justin Trudeau. Andrea Horwath, she's no different than Kathleen Wynne. See, these are just cookie-cutter people. See, the only problem that Jagmeet Singh has with Justin Trudeau, really, is that Justin Trudeau's policies don't go far enough. The main problem Andrea Horwath has with Kathleen Wynne's policies don't go far enough. So the New Democrats are actually worse than the Liberals. I know that's hard to say. They are actually worse than them. It actually makes me laugh that I have to say they are worse, because you wouldn't think of it. You couldn't think anybody could be worse. But if we actually allowed the NDP to have their time in office, I guarantee you, Kathleen Wynne is going to seem like a more almost conservative in terms of these people, and when we're comparing them to these people. This is why the people like the New Democrats don't have any problem whatsoever insulting Canadians or their citizens or their veterans, such as this new NDP, such as this new story that has come out recently, which says NDP candidate says she won't wear a poppy. And also I saw one when I was also looking this up. It was also, she was saying that she believed that Remembrance Day is some form of brainwashing, as if it's some sort of military brainwashing. They haven't. What a lack of respect. What a lack of respect. What's her name? Candidate Laura Kamiker from Mississauga Centre. She is part of the Ontario the Ontario New Democratic Party, so she's not part of the federal party. But what a huge amount of disrespect to our veterans, for the people who have fought and died to keep this woman safe, just so she can stand over them and spit on their graves, because this is exactly what she's doing. Make no mistake, there have been a number of Canadians who have died serving overseas, fighting for freedom, and this can even, World War II, World War I. I mean, we can definitely give you more modern day examples, but they have gone over, fought for our freedom so they can give us the society we have today, and this woman has no problem just sitting over there, and she would dance on their dead bodies if it was right here. This is what I actually believe. I believe this candidate, Laura Kamiker, I don't know if that's actually how you pronounce her, but she would dance on their fucking bodies of these veterans if she could. How disrespectful is that? The reason we wear a poppy is because it's a very small symbolic gesture. And right there, it's a mirrored image, so it's a mirror image, so I did that wrong. But right there, this podcast supports our troops. We support our troops a lot, and I don't know why I'm saying we. It's just me over here. I'm literally the only one for this podcast. We support our troops because they have given a great sacrifice for us. They have done a lot of work for us. They have put themselves in harm's way time and time and time again for the rest of us, so that way we can have a very luxurious lifestyle. I mean, I can bitch all the time about how much I hate my shitty 2-bedroom apartment, how much I don't seem to get much, how there's not really too much money out there, not too many good jobs. But you know what? Our living situation is much better than plenty of other situations. So that's why we support this we support our troops in this podcast. But she couldn't give a fuck. I mean, how did she feel about? I really would like to know her feelings on what happened to Corporal Nathan Cirillo, who was gunned down at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier on October 22nd, 2014. Yes, I have never forgotten that name, because people always said, don't forget this name, just because he got gunned down for no reason by a terrorist Islamic fuck. So one thing I actually did, whether it means something or not, was I made sure that I remembered that man's name. There was no way I was going to forget it. But I would love to know what her feelings were on about the situation, Corporal Nathan Cirillo. Did she just see him as a some sort of state-sanctioned murderer? I wouldn't be surprised if that's what she had to say on it. I really wouldn't be surprised at all. But she can't even. Here's the other thing about the poppies. The money goes to veterans groups. The money goes to those people who have fought for our country, served for our country, been injured for our countries, and it goes to support the families for soldiers that have been killed for our country. But she can't even dish out a fucking buck, and she can't take 1 week to wear a goddamn poppy? Are you kidding me? I buy multiple poppies in November. I drop my cash in those bins whenever I can. Whenever I fucking can. And I have no respect for somebody who has no respect for the veterans. If you're just going to think of them as some sort of state-sanctioned murderers, then fuck you. That's why, years after this event, I hold great contempt for one woman that came in to my Tim Hortons years ago. I think it was my first year when I was working. I was maybe 15 or 16 at the time. And what ended up happening was this woman came in, and she made her order like everybody else. She ordered coffee, she ordered a sandwich. And so anyway, the way it worked is the setup of the Tim Hortons was that the sandwich counter, many times it's right up front, like you can see it from where you're ordering. Well, this was a smaller location, so it was actually kind of off to the side. It was almost like halfway between the back and the front of the house. So what ended up happening was this woman ordered a sandwich. It was just me and my supervisor. My supervisor was in the office doing work. I made her a coffee. I went to go make her a sandwich. Spent a couple minutes making her a sandwich. Gave it to her. She went on her way. Didn't really say anything. A few hours later, near the end of the night, we're cleaning up. My supervisor is doing a whole thing. She's helping me shut down the front. And suddenly she turns to me and she says, "Where's the money for the poppies?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "There's supposed to be a box right here in the middle for the poppies, like where people drop the money on. Where is it?" I said, "I have no idea, we looked around the store, we couldn't find it. We thought maybe it fell on the ground in the front. Nope, couldn't find it." So we went to go check the cameras. When I left to go make this woman a sandwich, she started to notice about how it was just sitting in there. It wasn't sealed down, it wasn't glued, none of that. So what did she do? What did this cunt do? She took it up. She picked up the money meant for the veterans, dropped it in her purse, without me knowing, because I was in the back. I came up and gave her a sandwich. She walked out with that veterans' money. I have never seen that cunt before again. I've never seen that cunt before. I've never seen that cunt again. But I hate her with a burning passion because she stole from our veterans. And that's why I hate this cunt with a burning passion. I hate this Laura Kaminker, or however the fuck you pronounce her name, because that is so disrespectful. You know what? Some days, one thing I haven't necessarily approved of is the idea of mandatory military service. I just don't think you should force somebody to go into the military. They just force them into the military against their will. But when people like her show up, I think that should be her punishment for certain things. I think that if someone even speaks that thing, they should go into the military. They should serve and then come back and see if she'll say something like Remembrance Day is war propaganda, is fucking, and see if she won't wear a poppy next time. I mean, how could you possibly, anybody, respect somebody like this? In my honest opinion, you can't. You can't respect anybody like this who is willing to do and say these things about our veterans. Unbelievable. And the thing is, too, is I can't help but this would never fly in America. I can't see it. I could not see that if this woman came out and said something like this in politics, no way would she ever be allowed back into politics. Alrighty. So as we move on to our next story, which has been, it's kind of been in and out of the news over the last couple of months. Sorry, it's been in and out of the news over the last week or so, but this story actually can go back all the way to September of 2017, because this is when this guy, this ISIS fighter, first made his appearance on Canadian media. Oh yeah, and just so you know, that's the pimp minister right there, Justin Trudeau. Yeah, that's who that is. Alright, so as we see here, Canadian ISIS fighter at the heart of New York Times podcast says RCMP gave him a lie detector test. Abu Husayfa says the polygraph test did not work for me. Yeah, of course it didn't work for you, you fucking cunt. So what this goes back to is that back in September of 2017, the CBC ended up giving this guy an interview after he returned from fighting with ISIS. He returned back to Canada, and they ended up giving an interview, and I can't even fucking believe it, but they protected this guy's identity because that name, Abu Husayfa, is actually his ISIS fighting name. They did not reveal what his real name was, and they get in that picture you see there where he's sitting behind those panels and he's only a shadow, is what they showed their interview on. They protected this fucking murderer's identity. Like, why? Why would you ever do something like that? Anyway, so there was a New York Times podcast called Caliphate. Yeah, Caliphate, that was it. Oops, sorry, going back down. And so what ended up happening is about a week or two ago, he ended up speaking to the New York Times podcast Caliphate, where he said that he was responsible for the execution of either one or two people in Syria, and this caused a massive outrage. People are like, this guy is walking around free in our fucking country, and he murdered people in Syria. Like, not only did he go off to fight for ISIS, but he murdered people while he was over there. And then when the outrage hits, he started to be like, oh no, I was just lying about that, no, I never killed anybody. Which, yeah, I'm sure anybody's going to believe that. He said he was being hyperbolic or whatever, but, like, this guy's trying to now take it back after all the outrage happened. So what they're saying is that he ended up taking a polygraph test, and he said the polygraph didn't work for me, which they didn't really go into too much more detail other than that. But my guess is he fucking failed the polygraph. Because he actually said when, after he said that, he spoke to CBC News, and he said he denied killing anyone. When asked about this statement on the podcast, he said, you can put me through a polygraph, and it will prove that I didn't kill anyone. Now, first off, is you can fake a polygraph test, because a polygraph measures your pulse, it measures certain other physical characteristics of your being. So if you're able to go in with a calm head, if you go in and you don't really, if you go in with a calm head, then, and you're able to control that your heart's not beating too quickly, you're not breathing too quickly, you can pass these tests. Actually, there's a line from Seinfeld that was perfect. Jerry Seinfeld was supposed to do a polygraph test. I can't remember for what reason. I think it was like his girlfriend was in the police force, and she asked him to take a polygraph test, but there were certain things that he was worried that she would ask him and he'd have to lie about, but he wouldn't pass it. So his buddy George is trying to give him some advice because George is a liar, and before he leaves, he says, Jerry, if you believe it's a lie, if you believe it's the truth, then it's not a lie. And that's more or less the attitude you do have to go in with a polygraph test. So this doesn't prove that he didn't kill anybody. And why would you even bring this up if you were in that situation? He had to know that saying that would cause a massive backlash. I have no doubt in my mind that this guy has killed people, and now he's just trying to deflect blame. And it even says down here, hold on, it says, here we go. Rukmini Kalimaki, I probably fucked that name out good, the New York Times correspondent behind the podcast, says she spoke to Husayfa last night and thinks his tone was becoming somewhat cocky at this point. Why would he be becoming somewhat cocky? Because he knows he's getting away with it. He knows that he can go on public record, say this sort of shit, and nothing is being done. And there's absolutely no reason why we are not doing anything about this, because if we look to the Canadian Criminal Code, says we have sections 83.191 and 83.201. First one, leaving Canada to facilitate terrorist activity. Everyone who leaves or attempts to leave Canada or goes or attempts to go abroad on board a conveyance with the intent to leave Canada for the purpose of committing an act or omission outside Canada that, if committed in Canada, would be an offense under subsection 83.19 is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for a term of not more than 14 years. And the second offense over here, the 83.201, says leaving Canada to commit an offense for a terrorist group, more or less is worded the same way. It says everyone who leaves and attempts to leave Canada goes and attempts to blah, 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 blah. It's pretty much the same wording, saying that you can receive an indictment upwards of no more than 14 years, I say. No more than 14 years. But this is why no Canadian understands why our government is refusing to do anything about these people, because they have gone abroad. ISIS is classified as a terrorist group by Canadian law. By Canadian standards, is a terrorist group, so every Canadian who is left to go fight for this group or go to stay in their caliphate or support the group is guilty of this offense and should be arrested as soon as they enter the country. But our government is doing nothing about it. This is exactly why I made that graphic that shows the one that just very end before I shut it off, that shows Justin Trudeau in the pimp outfit, which is actually taken from a Seinfeld episode of Kramer, and why it has the guy who gives them the little fucking props has the fucking ISIS the ISIS logo over his face, is because this is exactly what they're fucking doing. Justin Trudeau, the pimp minister, is pimping for ISIS. He is defending ISIS, and because of this, ISIS fighters want to come to Canada. That's actually what's happening. Jihadi Jack is one of the worst recruiters. He's from the UK. He was one of the worst recruiters for ISIS, and I have no doubt in my mind that he fought for ISIS and possibly killed for ISIS. The UK is hunting down all of its citizens that went to go fight for ISIS. So is America. So are plenty other countries out there. But Jihadi Jack full out said, I don't want to go to UK. I want to go stay in Canada. Holy shit, you know you're a terrorist haven when such a well-known fucking terrorist like that says, no, I'm going to go stay here. This is the danger we have in Canada right now. We are importing fucking terrorists who have experience in fighting, firearm, committing terrorist acts, and can we really say that they're not going to commit some sort of terrorist attack while they're here? Probably, most likely. I would say, in my stupid opinion, definitely. We can expect more of these terrorist attacks going on. And I can tell you one thing. If anybody in my family gets hurt or killed from a terrorist attack from an ISIS soldier that returned from the Middle East to Canada, I'm going to lose my fucking shit. I am going to lose my fucking shit. Because none of my family should be forced to be put through that. None of my family, none of your families should have to be hurt or killed or even live in the fear of being hurt and killed by ISIS fighters. We should hunt them down, put a fucking bullet in the back of their head, or hell, better yet, do it in the front of the head. We should gladly look one of these people in the eyes as we're fucking doing it. Just bang! Right in their fucking head, because these guys are animals. They are fucking animals. And you know what? That's the only people that I have no shame of saying deserve death. There is almost nobody on this planet that I would wish death on or say deserve death, but ISIS fighters, hell fucking yeah, they deserve to die. Every ISIS fighter, everybody who's ever gone over, deserves to fucking die. And this is what I don't understand about the media. Is just like, if they're not, they're protecting them. This is what they did to this guy. This fucking, what was his name? This fucking ISIS fighter, Abu Huzaifa. That's exactly what they did when they gave him an interview, protected his identity. I don't know, what is happening to our country, guys? What is happening to our country where it's seen as intolerant to not bring back ISIS fighters. And this is something that the Liberals have defended in the House of Commons since this whole situation has gone down. They have defended bringing them back. This goes back to Justin Trudeau during the campaign where he said, a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Because Harper was saying that these terrorists should have their citizenship taken away. God damn it. And Justin Trudeau made him seem like he's the worst fucking person in the world because he said that. But Justin Trudeau is gladly putting every single one of us in danger. Ralph Goodale is putting every single one of us in danger. The Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. Emergency Preparedness. Fucking gayest name for a goddamn ministry. You could come up with something better than that. Ugh, Jesus Christ. And the thing is, too, is we are immigrating so many of these people that have these radical ideas already inserted in their brain, that has already been put there through their radical religion. Jesus, it pisses me off watching the things go down this way. It pisses me off. The fact that it's actually now, by our government standard, unacceptable to almost unacceptable to talk about this. I am waiting for the next law to come through. There almost was one. There was the M103, which was talking about Islamophobia, and then there was the M103 Commission report, which was pretty much talked about how terrible Canada is and how Islamophobic it is. Well, the thing is time and time again, it's been proven that we are willing to treat the Islamic faith and the Muslims a lot fucking nicer when they're a minority in our country than they will ever treat us as a majority. The way that they talk about other religions, the way they talk about the non-believers is despicable. Right now, the only countries that are willing to kill atheists are fucking Islamic countries. The Bible is banned in 50 countries. Give you one fucking guess which countries those are in. That's right, Islamic countries. Maybe one or two more in some other ones, I'm not sure. But you know what? At least 95 to 99% of those countries, where the 50 countries where the Bible is banned, Islamic countries. We treat them a lot fucking better because our society is built on being tolerant. But you know what? I'm at the point in my life where I'm done being tolerant to this radical religion. I am fucking done. I've even talked to some of my Muslim friends and I've toned myself down in some of my feelings because of this, but I think I'm done with that because what is toning it down ever done? And the thing is, it's most like a couple of my Muslim friends, I don't believe for a second that they would ever pick up a gun in the name of their religion. But I also realize that these are, first of all, not from the Middle East. They're from Eastern Europe. At least that's where they immigrated from. They're Canadian born, but their parents from Eastern Europe. So I think that makes a difference. And on top of that, they are not even really that practicing Muslims. They practice a few different things. Like I know that they fast on Ramadan. I know that they listen to the whole halal foods. They will not eat pork. And a couple of other things that they do pertain, but it's not like their religion is like they're praying 5 times a day or they're fucking, it's not like they're praying 5 times a day or they really take hardcore about, they know I'm an atheist and like they don't have anything to say about that. But this is not the norm for this religion. This is not the norm whatsoever. Hell, talking to Arjun too has really opened my eyes a little bit more too, because he's even talked about how his country has battled with this so much. Right now, all the problems, most of the problems where these events were going on during the Indian election were in the Muslim-dominated areas, and he's talked about the way that like the way that they treat the Hindu majority in there. I mean, he was talking about how the Hindus had a religious celebration that is based on a date. I can't really remember exactly what it is because I'm not religious. I don't really care that much. I can't remember what the date was or what the celebration was, but it's supposed to happen on a specific date. But the Muslims in their community were putting up such a fuss that they wanted them to put their religious holiday on hold so that way they could celebrate their fucking religious holiday. He's also talked about how pretty much every year they take the Muslims, in an insult to the Hindus, take a cow and slaughter it in fucking public because cows are sacred animals to Hindus. So time and time again, people of the Islamic faith, the Muslims, have proven that they will treat us worse than we are willing to treat them. But all the time, it happens to be the Middle Eastern Muslims. I'm just sick and tired of this shit. I am sick and tired of being treated as a second-class citizen. I am sick and tired of having to actually worry about possibly, like, either Sharia law coming to my country, or there might be a fucking terrorist attack that comes to my country. I'm sick of it. Well, thank you all for joining me on the podcast today. I'm Adrian Lloyd, just my stupid opinion. See y'all soon.